Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation podcast.
Welcome to Mintel's Little Conversation, where our experts bring you fresh ideas and new perspectives on how consumers eat, drink, shop, groom and think. My name is Sam Dover. I'm a global beauty analyst for Mintel. And today we're going to be talking about sustainability. We recorded a podcast on this very topic back in July. If you've not heard it yet, and this is a topic of interest, then please do go back and listen, because everything we spoke about then is as relevant today as it was earlier in the year. But as the conversation surrounding sustainability continues to evolve, we wanted to revisit the conversation and look at how some of the key topics we've been discussing actually impact brands. So with that in mind, today I'm joined by my colleague Richard Cope, who authored our 2021 Sustainability Barometer, and Jo Chidley, who founded sustainable beauty brand The Beauty Kitchen, to discuss all things sustainability related. So to get us started, I just want to get you both to just say hello. So we'll start with Jo.
Hi everyone, I'm Jo Chidley from Beauty Kitchen.
Hi everyone, I'm Richard from Mintel.
So let's get into it. One of the things that we discussed last time we spoke, Richard, was this idea of the climate reality gap, which essentially looked at how consumers are externalizing culpability. But since then, the UK has hosted the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference, in other words, COP26. So I'm really interested to hear from you both. What impact do we think this has had on consumer attitudes, and what other outcomes do we think were notable from COP26?
Well, talking about that climate reality gap, the research you ran around COP suggests that consumers are actually pretty savvy about this. And I think one of the positives around COP is the fact that it's put these issues in the public eye. So public awareness, public engagement with these issues has definitely risen. So for example, the research we did in relation to COP found that, the majority of consumers do agree with things like wealthy countries helping developing countries address climate change. They do agree that, the imports a country like the UK takes in should count for the UK's emissions. So that reality gap, I think, is closing a little bit, and COP, I think, has been a big help in that regard. One of the positives is definitely the growing consumer awareness.
And I just have to echo that. Being with my Glaswegian accent, being a native here and having the 2 weeks of COP, the amplification of some of those messages, it has just been phenomenal. And like everything, there's the good, the bad and the ugly, and I think we could debate all of these for most of the podcast today, but if I take the good, because I like to take the positive first, for me it was getting everyone talking about it in a way that they wanted to talk about it. And it kind of reminded me of when we had the Olympics here in London, and the amount of people that were not really that sporty, talking about sport. And I think the legacy will be quite similar, of where we will, as a nation, become climate champions. And I really hope that happens. Yeah,
I mean, another reason I'm positive about it is I think all the negativity around COP has been talking about it as a political failure, right? So people are talking about, we didn't eliminate coal, politicians weren't strong enough on this. But I think that's not that surprising either, because if we look at the research we ran for COP, we could see quite clearly that the proportion of consumers who said, my country should stop investing in fossil fuels is pretty low. It tends to be about 40%. So there isn't the kind of public backing to sort of give us that political will. But I think, that will develop and change, because exactly what Joe's saying, these issues are, people are getting more educated around the realities of that. I think if we ran that research again now, you'd get a stronger sentiment. But the big positive for me, and it's kind of what we're talking about today, is the business side of it as well. I mean, look at the huge amounts of money being, put forward, the huge amounts of capital by, the founding of the GFANZ group and things like that. There's huge amounts of money being put forward to help developing countries deal with that. And for me, the kind of mobilization of business and that capital was the real positive story coming out of this.
Yeah, and I think as an SME and a fast growing business, especially because we sit within the sustainability space. So, for us to be given additional support or direction as well as a business, but also that awareness from financial institutions, because a lot of the challenges that we've had as a business is trying to understand how can we place a value on sustainability. Because at the moment, the way that my balance sheet and my accounts are driven is all financial. It's all about a pound sign at the end of the day. However, the value that's placed in my eyes within sustainability, whatever that is for your business, for me, there should be some different ways of being able to present that value, not just through the financials. And I think that's been really helpful to notice that the financial sector are kind of sitting up and going, the pound sign is still very important, the commercials are still very important, but we have to understand how we can place the value here in terms of what a business is doing within sustainability. And, a lot of the bigger financial institutions have come out. So NatWest, for instance, came out at COP and they have said that remuneration within their employee base is going to be linked to net zero targets. That when you're going through your risk profile as a business, there will be 3 questions that will be related to what are you doing about sustainability within your business. And that's never happened before.
I mean, going back to the political level about this, a country like the UK, one of the positives, I think, is one of the few countries to actually have enshrined, a lot of the commitments they made in Paris in law. So this is going to turn into legislation. This is going to turn into compliance issues for businesses later down the line. The research we have at Mintel says, maybe surprisingly, the majority of consumers in the countries we survey do think that the higher the environmental impact of a product, the higher its price should be. Whether they're saying that should be passed on to them is an entirely different matter. But to Joe's point, we are starting to see, the smart businesses which are looking long term are already doing that. They're looking at investment long term, and they are putting a price on the environmental impact of things and factoring that into the investment and the true cost of these things. So I think at a business level, that's shifting. It's going to result in a big change in legislation. And this is going to come down to consumers later down the line, whether businesses try and pass on that cost or whether they see it as a necessary short-term investment to secure their long-term resilience, profitability, reputation. We'll have to see, but they really should be doing the latter, I guess.
On that point, one question that I feel like comes up time and time again from our clients is, are consumers willing to pay more for sustainable goods and services? What advice would you give brands that are still asking that question? So we've obviously talked a bit there in terms of, how do you put a value on it? What advice would you give those brands that are still asking that question?
I think it depends on, why you're asking that question. So you're asking that question because you think that sustainability is going to come at a cost. Yeah. And like any innovation, and that's how we viewed sustainability within Beauty Kitchen. We view it as NPD and innovation. So yes, you're looking for that return on investment. But what happens through sustainability issues that you tackle within your business is that you end up becoming more effective and efficient. So actually your cost base is reduced. So, on some occasions you may have to increase the price of your products, but on most occasions it's actually looking internally at your business and making those efficiencies that then reduce the costs. You can then tell stories to your customers around what that is that you've done. And that's where I think sustainability is a real innovation driver for me, because you can look at your business and make your business stronger and see it as an opportunity, but you can then take your customers with you by storytelling and saying to them, this is how we're doing our sustainability journey, come along with us.
Going back to bringing it back to consumers, Sam, your original question, my answer would be no. Consumers won't pay a premium for these products. Clearly, some will. People with the budget. There is obviously a premium sustainability market. We know all the brands are operating in that, but it's kind of a wasted question. We get pressured to ask that question, but asking people, would you pay a premium? It's very easy to say yes to that at the point of purchase. The reality is no. And we'll come on to some of the red lines and factors consumers have. But yeah, as Joe says, I mean, if people think this is a good way to start charging premium prices and making more money, that's not what it's about. The financial arguments for this are really kind of imperatives about securing your future resilience, making sure those resources you depend on are still going to be there in 10 years. And it's about stop throwing away money, stop wasting money. I mean, the current model we have, the take, make, waste model, that is becoming out of date. So, the smart brands are realizing that, I don't know, McDonald's coffee byproducts, that's someone else's raw material, and they're establishing relationships with other brands to turn that into a resource, something which is going to bring in money. And talking about resources, if you look at brands that are really celebrated like Unilever in terms of their work, in terms of issuing sustainable lines, I mean, one of the reasons they're actually reaping the rewards now, and I think they said they had 1.2 billion in savings since 2008, is things like reformulating to reduce the amount of things which are going into their product. So that it's a way of cutting costs in the longer term. And if we talk about something like, we've spoken to Joe about this before, but if we're going to start using things like recyclable plastics, yes, that's going to cost you more money right now. But fast forward a few years, when that's being done at more scale, that's going to be saving you money. And that's going to be, you're going to get past having to pay landfill taxes and things like that, get past the compliance issues. So maybe some short-term pain, but it's all going to be about sort of, stop wasting things, stop literally throwing money away in the future. And then the other benefits you get, of course, are, increased loyalty from your customers. We know that this is a massive driver for that. And from your staff as well, the people who work, your stakeholders who work in your business. Studies show the productivity, their happiness, their engagement with the business is going to go through the roof if you're a genuinely purpose-driven business.
And yet, in whatever way we look at it, whether you are a consumer, if that's your label of the day, or whether you're an SME, or whether you're a large conglomerate, everyone on the planet is responsible for sustainability. And you have to figure out, what part are you going to play? Are you going to celebrate it and face into it and, use it as an opportunity for innovation, or, not?
Yeah, definitely. So another thing that we frequently discuss at Mintel, and I'm sure it's on your mind as well, Joe, is consumer education. I'm really interested, what you both think on this topic. So how important is education, and what impact does it really have on consumer behavior? So when, as a brand, for example, you're, using storytelling, as you mentioned previously, Joe, what impact does that have?
In terms of motivations and consumer behaviours and how do you educate consumers, there's so much research that has been out there. In fact, it will be really great to hear some of the research from Richard. But a lot of the times it's a really hard thing to do. But the way that we approach it is that rather than setting out to educate, what we want to do is we want to make definitive science-based fact accessible and convenient. But when it comes to science, a lot of the times consumers, unless it's to do with the efficacy of a product, they're not really that interested, or potentially they're a bit suspicious of it because they don't necessarily understand it. And that's where the storytelling for us starts. So if somebody is buying a product from us for the first time, it's about the storytelling. Yeah, if they then come back and they're buying their second product, that's where they then want to scratch beneath the surface of Beauty Kitchen. Who are you really? And do I want to be associated, with you as a business? And as they become more loyal customers, they want to become more into the detail of what it is that you can provide them. And I do believe in convenience, accessibility, and science information, scientific fact. Because at the end of the day, you can storytell, but you need to make sure that you're not greenwashing. And that's really where, as a scientist myself, that's where that has to sit. but we never lead with the science outside of efficacy.
Well, my favorite greenwashing story I've seen recently, I won't name the brand, but they talked about how they'd taken out something like 20 Tyrannosaurus Rexes worth of plastic. And that's a classic bit of contextless nonsense in terms of, is that a lot of plastic or not? But back, Joe, yes, our research shows there are some massive education gaps. I guess the first big one to address is our barometer. The countries are running the research in are all developed, wealthy countries, yet there's always more people who say, my country is suffering from climate change than my country is causing climate change. So, the first thing we have to do is, get more people. People are only going to engage if they wake up to the fact that, they're culpable, they're part of the problem, they're part of the solution. Science, you mentioned, we asked consumers whether they thought science could provide solutions to the climate crisis. And the results are very disappointing. Usually looking around 40% of consumers in most countries would say that. And if we think about science is integral. Science is going to give us chemical recycling. It's giving us more efficient batteries. It's giving us solar. It's giving us hydrogen fuel cells. So it has a massive role to play. And I still think with consumers, there's this hangover where they're still kind of blithely placing their trust in all things natural. Natural can be great, of course. I know it's one of your core values as a business, but I think consumers sometimes aren't asking, okay, is natural finite in this case? Where does it come from in that regard? So yeah, there is some work to be done around science, and I completely take your point about the convenience aspect. People don't want to be delving into chemistry on the back of pack. They want the information to be delivered very quickly, very clearly in simple, clear metrics, so they can see, okay, does this product use less water than a rival product, or how much of a saving is that in context? And I guess when it comes to consumer education, our data also showed, if you look at probably the area where consumers and brands are kind of coming together most, it would be on something like packaging, I think. And basically 3/4 of consumers don't understand the recyclability, the compostability, the biodegradability of different materials. And to be honest, why would they? Because I think a lot of companies have probably gotten away with being opaque about that. It's easy just to make a big marketing play and say, oh, we use some recycled ocean plastic in this, or we're removing plastic, then addressing on the big issues. And the final thing I'll say about that very quickly is, when we talk about education, I think what we need to see more of is more brands, educating consumers on where the biggest impacts are. It's going to be energy, right? And what are they doing to reduce their energy footprint? And all of this helps educate consumers about what they can do in their own lives as well.
Yeah, it's so I do a lot of different webinars, not just from an industry as in personal care cosmetics, but also from a business perspective, but also from a schools perspective, because I want to raise awareness, particularly within circular business models. That's, really where my forte is. And the big question I get asked all the time is, if there's one sustainable swap, what is the one that I should do? And I always say, change to a renewable energy supplier. And it kind of takes people by surprise because they think it's going to be something else or something really complicated. And don't get me wrong, I don't know what the stats are yet, but there must be easily over 85% of households in the UK still have gas central heating. Yeah, but even if you start with renewable energy supply for your electricity needs, then at least the reduction in emissions is huge. But it also gets you on the journey, and that's what we want to do. It's not about a handful of people doing sustainability perfectly. It's about millions and millions of us doing it imperfectly. And I think that's the key with business as well, which, I really like to get into the detail of, is for businesses to get on that journey, but get on it anyway. Just do something rather than nothing.
Well, yeah. I mean, energy, I think, I'm generalizing a little bit, but I believe, of all the emissions we generate, every year on the planet, 75% of them are related to energy. So that is the most impactful thing we can do. It's the most impactful thing businesses can do. But it's still quite rare to hear businesses talking about that. Some examples come to mind, Burberry talking about trying to use renewable energy in all of their own operations and also in the supply chain as well. at a mainstream level. I remember Budweiser recently being able to sort of boast that they were now sort of brewing beers made, with 100% renewable energy. That's really impressive and differentiating. And I fall into the bracket you're talking about, Jo, in terms of, where my heating comes from in my house. Certainly I might pat myself on the back for leasing an EV or doing other things. But yeah, that's still a big problem. And I think that connection between, where we all are as individuals and where businesses are is really important, because I think we know the challenges ourselves. We know, we can't solve this overnight. So I think if businesses are more kind of humble about this, more human about this, and say, look, okay, this is where our footprint is today. This is where we need to get to. It's going to take this long, which increasingly they are doing. But I think that kind of transparency about where you are, rather than greenwashing using T-Rexes like we talked about earlier, is really important. It is a journey. And there's nothing wrong with saying, this is where we are on the journey. We're only 20% of the way there, but this is our target. This is our plan. We'll keep you in progress, because I think we as individuals relate to that. I want to change my heating system and things like that, but I might not be able to afford to, get a heat pump yet or whatever. I think, there is that connection. So more humility, I think, from businesses around that will make them, a bit of fallibility, a bit of humanity goes a long way in the comms and the way consumers feel about those businesses.
Well, we've actually taken some businesses by surprise. So I know that you guys know that we're B Corp certified. We're also Cradle to Cradle certified. And both those certifications, alongside many others, have really focused in on our targets to net zero. How do we do that? So for Cradle to Cradle, for instance, you have to use renewable energy where you can throughout your supply chain. And where you can't, so for instance, Beauty Kitchens HQ, we still have gas central heating. Now, it's going to come out, but it's probably going to take another 18 months, 2 years to do that. But we offset that. Now, it's not a perfect picture, but it means that we then know what we need to do to be able to get fully onto renewable energy. But as part of the supply chain net zero, scope 1, scope 2, let's talk about scope 3. We've then talked to each of our suppliers, and we've faced into saying to them, do you use renewable energy? Some of them, believe it or not, some of them, particularly very down south in England, they do, which is great. And some of them not. And what we've said is, right, how can we work together as a plan to get you guys onto renewable energy? Yeah, and we're a small, we're 16 people, we're a relatively small business, but we've actually made them think just by asking that question. And it's not going to be something that happens overnight. But if everybody keeps talking about it and asking those questions, then, there will be a nudge behaviour that moves us forward. And we can then all, talk about it together.
Yeah, I mean, looking at big consumer-facing businesses like retailers and supermarket chains, that sort of they might talk about all the great work they're doing in their operations, but as you alluded to, Jo, their biggest footprint's going to be in their supply chains. Upwards of 90% of their emissions are going to be in scope 3. And I think, we are seeing some big businesses get involved, and, even, they've got countries all around the world, and they're getting involved in helping people use renewable energy right down to, sort of smallholder farmers and things. But one other thing you talked about, Jo, that theme of convenience came back again into my head when you were talking about, I believe you're the first high street retailer to get B Corp certification here. That's convenience, right? Consumers see that logo. That's what they want, and they obviously, you've established a brand which performs that kind of choice editing as well. You don't have to, in a way, worry about these issues, because either through the certification or the branding that is taken care of. And I think that's what consumers want. They don't want to have to read the small print. We should all make sure it's available to them, but they don't want to have to read the small print. They want to know through the certification, through your brand, that those things are being covered.
Yeah, and I know when we first started out, we placed a lot of value in talking about sustainability because, I'm a sustainability nerd, and that's what I wanted to talk about. And it was just turning customers off, really. So we had to change our narrative, because sustainability is generally not what to lead with. Yeah, in some industries that will be the case, but in personal care and beauty, it isn't. It has to be efficacy. It's still efficacy. If the product doesn't work, people don't want to buy it. It doesn't matter how sustainable, organic or otherwise it is.
Yeah, I mean, we see that in our research around what we call consumers' red lines. And, we ask them about, when they're buying coffee or soap or socks, very kind of standard staple products, what they think about. And sustainability factors do come up. It's pleasing to see. They might, if we ask them, what are the 5 most important things, they might come up in 4th and 5th place. But yeah, it's the quality of the product, familiarity with the brand, which is more important. And the analogy with packaging there as well. People want packaging that preserves the product. We can't be having back to your opening point, Jo. We can't have wonderful sustainable packaging which is going to degrade in my back garden if it doesn't protect the product and all the energy and water it's gone into making that in the first place. So yeah, those red lines are definitely there. People aren't going to buy products just because they're sustainable or just because they're ethical.
No, that's it. But I think what happens is, as a brand, if you've gone down the route, whether that's certification, and you don't necessarily need to get the certification, you can still use the principles. Generally, these certifying marks are very open source. So if you're a small brand, for instance, or even a big brand, and you're thinking, I don't know what the investment would be. How much is it going to cost me? How much time? There can easily be a mini project that wouldn't be that time consuming or cost consuming to find out if that's the right thing for you. The thing I like about it is it gives you a framework. So it tells you what you're really good at, it shows you where your gaps are, and it also tells you what you're not doing that you should be doing. And that makes it relatively easy as a business owner to go, okay, these are the things that I can then prioritise and work towards in a 12, 24, 36 month period.
Yeah, definitely. And I think because we've touched on it a couple of times in this conversation, but I think I want to kind of highlight it a bit more in terms of the importance of partnerships, because I think so many brands and companies go into the approach of sustainability a bit kind of singular. This is going to be a part of our USP. We want to be the brand that is doing this for the environment or that for the environment. And actually what's probably more powerful is going to be forging those partnerships and, collaborating and driving that change. Do you both agree?
It's tricky. I agree. But it's, collaboration is tricky because you don't have control over it, so it's quite organic in the sense of how does it work, and particularly collaboration between competing companies and, within the same space. So if we take Beauty Kitchen, for instance, and we take retailers, whether that's high street retailers or supermarkets, the big grocers, and we then take brands, whether that's other indie brands or big brands like Unilever that we mentioned earlier, it's how do you make that collaboration work? Because I know it's the right thing to do, but I've really had to push at quite a closed door because a lot of people have said, but you're competition. So it's quite unnerving and quite tricky. But the way that we've done it is we've used Beauty Kitchen as our demonstrator brand. And we've created a reusable packaging system, that is available for the industry. So we have Unilever as our second customer. And we launched Unilever products in reusable packaging through Asda, where Beauty Kitchen isn't stocked. Yeah. But that whole collaboration, even just saying that out loud, people will be thinking, how did that even work? Because it's tricky. I'm not going to say it isn't. However, the opportunity that has come out, not just for Beauty Kitchen, but for Unilever and Asda, has been phenomenal. And that's where it's gone into a lot more stores than was initially suggested.
I mean, yeah, collaboration's key. I mean, sustainability is complex, right? It's a systemic problem. I mean, I don't think there's any one company which can, has the expertise within that company to deal with all these issues. So you need to work with wider stakeholders. There might be people in the community, might be people in the government, associations and things. And I think between companies, obviously, I don't have the job of having to sort of work with a rival company and sort of getting that process to work, but the value of doing it is pretty obvious. You can work with your rivals on a common problem. You can obviously save resources, save time, and there are pleasingly lots of examples of big brands who are doing this. We've seen groups like McDonald's and Starbucks work together to try and sort of work on recyclable cup initiatives. We've had Adidas working with Allbirds to sort of try and create recyclable footwear and things like that. So there are great examples of it. I think sometimes it's just about working with people who are further along from you on a kind of consulting basis. Very famously, Walmart did that with Patagonia, looking at their sort of supply chains around sourcing, and they worked together to create something called the Hig Index to sort of make sure they had, they were sort of ticking all the right boxes in terms of getting their supply lines right in terms of their textiles. So I think it's the only way forward is some degree of collaboration. I mean, it's obviously very brave if you can do it with your rivals, but it's the only way we are going to manage to address these issues. It's too systemic, too complex to do it on your own.
Yeah, and what comes out of that, if you use the Patagonia and Walmart, when you use the Higgs, what's come out of that is its own organisation. And okay, it's a non-profit making organisation, but something else where the rest of the industry can actually utilise that. And that's, that's amazing that's almost been gifted to a certain extent. But coming back to your point, Richard, it is brave. But I want to try and encourage people being more brave. And that's where I think this backdrop of COP26 is giving everyone more confidence in talking about the good, the bad and the ugly.
So, and on that note, I think that's sadly all we've got time for today, although I very much could listen to you both talking about this all day. And hopefully we might get the chance to do it again in future, but I'll wrap up. So thank you to everyone for listening, and a huge thank you to Richard and Jo for joining me today and sharing your wealth of expertise. If you want to know more about Mintel, who we are and what we do, then head over to mintel.com. Our 2021 Sustainability Barometer is available to download at mintel.com, and for even more insights from our analysts, please do check out our blog and follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and also on that note, go and follow Jo and the Beauty Kitchen as well. So again, thank you for listening. Please make sure you subscribe, rate and review this podcast, and if you like what you've heard today, spread the word and look out for our next episode of Mintel's Little Conversation.